Rebecca Chun adjusted her thick-framed glasses as she shuffled through the pristine corridors of Lockheed Dynamics Advanced Systems Division in Palmdale, California. Her worn canvas messenger bag, a relic from her graduate school days 15 years ago, swayed gently against her hip with each measured step. The bag's frayed edges and faded university logo stood in stark contrast to the sleek titanium briefcases and designer laptop bags carried by her younger colleagues, who dominated the aerospace company's cutting-edge stealth development program. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 42, Rebecca had perfected the art of occupational invisibility. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, secured with a rubber band she'd found in her desk drawer that morning. Her clothes a navy cardigan over khaki. Slacks and sensible walking shoes could have been purchased from any department store catalog. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything more than a mid-level engineer, grinding through the final decades of an unremarkable career. The Advanced Systems Division occupied the entire 7th floor of Building C, a monument to modern aerospace engineering where the future of military aviation was conceived and refined. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered sweeping views of the Mojave Desert, where experimental aircraft carved silent paths through crystalline air above the Edwards Air Force Base test ranges. The hallways themselves were a study in controlled chaos whiteboards covered in incomprehensible equations, 3D printed prototype components scattered on workbenches, and the constant hum of supercomputers processing aerodynamic simulations. That would have been impossible just a decade earlier. Rebecca paused at the entrance to Laboratory 7 Delta, observing through the reinforced glass as the morning design review session was already underway. The conference room buzzed with the energy of brilliant minds attacking complex problems, their conversations peppered with acronyms and technical jargon that would sound like foreign languages to outsiders. Plasma flow dynamics, radar cross-section, minimization, metamaterial absorption coefficients. This was the vocabulary of stealth technology, the scientific pursuit of making multi-million-dollar aircraft disappear from enemy detection systems. Dr. Marcus Whitfield commanded the room from his position at the head of the polished conference table. At 38, he embodied everything the aerospace industry celebrated in its rising stars: an MIT doctorate in aeronautical engineering, 3 patents in stealth technology, and the kind of aggressive confidence that attracted both research, funding, and media attention. His presentation slides showcased the latest iteration of Project Shadowfall, the Pentagon's classified program to develop the next generation of stealth fighters. The aircraft's angular design looked like something carved from obsidian, all sharp edges and surfaces calculated to scatter radar waves into harmless directions. "Our current radar cross-section measurements are impressive," Whitfield announced, gesturing toward a complex chart displaying detection ranges across multiple frequency bands. "We've achieved a 94% reduction in detectability compared to conventional fighter aircraft. However, the Air Force requirements specify a 98% minimum, which means we're still falling short of operational specifications." Rebecca entered the laboratory quietly, taking her usual seat near the back corner where she could observe without drawing attention. Her official role was Senior Materials Engineer, a position that placed her somewhere in the middle tier of the project hierarchy. According to her personnel file, she specialized in composite materials and had spent the previous 8 years focused on weight reduction and structural integrity, rather than the exotic physics of electromagnetic invisibility. It was respectable work, but hardly the kind that generated headlines or career advancement opportunities. The morning briefing continued with reports from various engineering teams. Dr. Sarah Kim presented updates on the aircraft's revolutionary engine design, which channeled exhaust heat through internal cooling systems to minimize infrared signatures. Lieutenant Colonel James Rodriguez, the Air Force liaison, outlined the Pentagon's accelerated timeline for prototype testing, emphasizing the growing urgency as rival nations developed increasingly sophisticated detection capabilities. Each presentation showcased incremental improvements and marginal gains, the painstaking progress of engineering excellence, pushing against the boundaries of physical laws. Rebecca listened intently while making notes in a composition notebook that had seen better days. Her handwriting was precise but unremarkable, the careful script of someone accustomed to documenting technical details without editorial flourish. Occasionally, she would pause to sketch rough diagrams in the margins, simple geometric shapes, and mathematical relationships that seemed almost elementary compared to the sophisticated computer models dominating the discussion around her. The fundamental challenge, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the project's electromagnetic systems specialist, remains the same issue we've been grappling with for months. Current stealth technology excels at deflecting radar waves, but deflection inevitably creates secondary reflections. These ghost signatures are becoming detectable by advanced enemy systems, particularly when multiple radar installations coordinate their scanning patterns. Walsh's presentation displayed a three-dimensional simulation of radar waves interacting with the stealth fighter's surface. The visualization resembled a complex dance of light and shadow, with electromagnetic energy bouncing between carefully angled surfaces before scattering into space. Most of the radar energy disappeared harmlessly, but small percentages remained visible to sophisticated detection networks. We've explored numerous approaches to eliminate these residual signatures, Walsh continued. Advanced metamaterials that absorb rather than reflect radar energy. Plasma field generators that ionize the air around critical surfaces. Even experimental phase-shifting systems that attempt to cancel radar returns through destructive interference. Each solution introduces new complexities, weight penalties, or power requirements that compromise other aircraft systems. Rebecca shifted slightly in her seat, her fingers absently tracing patterns on her notebook page. To casual observers, she appeared to be following the technical discussion with the same polite attention demonstrated by other engineers whose specialties lay outside electromagnetic theory. Her expression revealed nothing beyond professional interest in colleagues' work, the kind of courteous engagement expected during interdisciplinary briefings. The truth was considerably more complex. Rebecca's understanding of stealth technology extended far beyond the composite materials expertise listed in her official documentation. During her graduate studies at Stanford, she had focused on electromagnetic theory and wave propagation, completing a doctoral dissertation on metamaterial applications that had attracted attention from several defense contractors. Her early career had involved classified research into advanced stealth systems, work that had taken her to secure facilities where theoretical physics met practical military requirements. That career had ended abruptly, 7 years earlier following a project that officially never existed. The details remained locked behind layers of classification and non-disclosure agreements, but the consequences had been devastatingly clear. Rebecca Chun, the promising stealth researcher, had vanished from the scientific literature, replaced by Rebecca Chun, the materials engineer who focused on mundane problems of structural integrity and weight optimization. It was a professional exile that she had accepted as the price of survival in an industry where certain types of knowledge carried dangerous implications. That Dr. Whitfield's voice drew her attention back to the present discussion. I want to emphasize that we're not looking for revolutionary breakthroughs at this stage, he stated with the authority of someone accustomed to managing both technical challenges and bureaucratic expectations. Project Shadowfall is too advanced and too critical to risk on unproven concepts. We need incremental improvements using established technologies. Reliable solutions that can be implemented within our current timeline and budget constraints. His words carried an implicit warning that Rebecca recognized from years of navigating corporate research environments. Innovation was encouraged within carefully defined boundaries, but proposals that strayed too far from conventional approaches were viewed with suspicion. The aerospace industry rewarded methodical progress over creative leaps, particularly when billions of dollars and national security implications were involved. The morning briefing concluded with assignments for the coming week. Each engineering team received specific objectives designed to achieve marginal improvements in their respective areas of responsibility. Engine efficiency gains are measured in fractions of percentage points. Weight reductions measured in pounds rather than hundreds of pounds. Radar cross-section improvements measured in decimal places rather than whole numbers. The accumulated effect of these efforts might eventually bridge the gap between current performance and Air Force requirements, but success was far from guaranteed. As the conference room emptied, Rebecca remained seated while reviewing her notes. The sketches in her notebook margins appeared deceptively simple, basic geometric shapes and elementary mathematical relationships that might have been produced by an undergraduate student rather than an experienced engineer. A casual observer would see nothing more than idle doodling during a routine meeting. Rebecca saw something entirely different. Hidden within those simple diagrams was the foundation of an approach to stealth technology that could revolutionize military aviation, not through exotic metamaterials or complex plasma fields, but through a fundamental reconsideration of how electromagnetic waves interacted with aircraft surfaces. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, requiring no advanced materials or sophisticated power systems. Instead, it relied on geometric principles that had been understood for decades, but never applied in precisely this configuration. The irony was not lost on her. After years of hiding her expertise and accepting professional marginalization, circumstances had positioned her to recognize a solution that had eluded the industry's most celebrated researchers. The answer lay not in pushing the boundaries of materials science or electromagnetic theory, but in applying classical physics principles with surgical precision. Dr. Whitfield approached her as she gathered her materials. "Rebecca, I wanted to discuss the composite panel testing scheduled for next week. We need to verify that our latest surface treatments maintain structural integrity under thermal cycling conditions." She nodded politely, recognizing the assignment as another routine materials engineering task designed to support other teams' innovations rather than generate breakthrough discoveries. "I'll have the thermal analysis completed by Thursday," she replied, slipping her notebook into the messenger bag that had accompanied her through 15 years of professional obscurity. "Excellent. Your materials work has been consistently reliable, which is exactly what we need during this critical development phase." The compliment was genuine but inadvertently condescending, the kind of praise typically reserved for dependable support staff rather than creative contributors. Rebecca accepted it with practiced grace, understanding that her carefully cultivated reputation for competent mediocrity served important protective functions. Better to be overlooked than to attract the kind of attention that had derailed her previous career. As she walked back to her individual workstation, Rebecca passed through Laboratory 7 Gamma, where junior engineers hunched over computer terminals running electromagnetic simulation software. Their screens displayed complex visualizations of radar wave interactions, mathematical models that attempted to predict how proposed design modifications would affect detection characteristics. The simulations were sophisticated and computationally intensive, requiring hours of processing time to generate results that might invalidate weeks of theoretical work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her own workstation occupied a corner of Laboratory 7 Echo. Surrounded by materials testing equipment and reference libraries, that reflected her official specialization. Tensile strength testing machines, thermal cycling chambers, and microscopic analysis systems dominated the space. Tools designed to verify that exotic composite materials could withstand the extreme conditions of supersonic flight. It was important work that contributed to aircraft safety and performance, but it fell far short of the cutting-edge research that defined Project Shadowfall's public identity. Rebecca settled into her desk chair and opened the secure terminal that provided access to classified technical documentation. Her security clearance allowed her to review detailed specifications for the stealth fighter's current design, including electromagnetic analysis reports that would remain hidden from public view for decades. The documents revealed the full scope of the detection challenge facing the engineering teams. Statistical evidence that current approaches were approaching their theoretical limits. She opened her composition notebook and began transferring her morning sketches into a computer-aided design program, translating hand-drawn concepts into precise mathematical models. The process was meditative, requiring careful attention to geometric relationships and dimensional accuracy. Each line and angle carried significance that would be invisible to anyone lacking deep expertise in electromagnetic theory. But Rebecca could visualize how radar waves would interact with the proposed surface modifications. The design that emerged on her screen was startlingly simple. Where conventional stealth technology relied on complex angular surfaces designed to scatter radar energy in unpredictable directions, her approach suggested subtle modifications that would create destructive interference patterns. Incoming radar waves would encounter precisely calculated surface features that generated return signals, exactly out of phase with the original transmission. The result would be complete cancellation rather than mere deflection, achieving true electromagnetic invisibility rather than simple signature reduction. The mathematical elegance was undeniable, but Rebecca understood that elegance alone would not convince skeptical colleagues who had invested years developing alternative approaches. Her solution challenged fundamental assumptions about stealth technology, suggesting that decades of research had overlooked a relatively straightforward application of classical wave theory. Such proposals typically encountered fierce resistance from established experts who had built careers on more complex methodologies. More troubling was the personal risk associated with proposing revolutionary changes to a classified military program. Rebecca's previous experience had taught her that innovative solutions could attract unwanted attention from intelligence agencies and defense contractors who preferred to maintain strict control over advanced technologies. The simple modification she had conceived could represent either a career-defining breakthrough or a catastrophic mistake that would complete her professional exile. As afternoon shadows began lengthening across the laboratory, Rebecca saved her preliminary design files and locked her terminal according to security protocols. The decision about whether to present her solution to the engineering team would require careful consideration of both technical merit and personal consequences. For now, the concept would remain hidden within her private files, another secret. In a career that had been shaped by the burden of dangerous knowledge, the Palmdale facility's parking lot buzzed with the controlled chaos of shift change as Rebecca made her way to her aging Honda Civic. The car's faded paint and minor dents marked it as distinctly unglamorous compared to the German luxury sedans and American pickup trucks preferred by her higher-paid colleagues. She had deliberately chosen reliability over status, understanding that attention to personal appearance could sometimes prove more dangerous than professional anonymity. During the drive home through the desert communities east of Los Angeles, Rebecca reflected on the day's revelations and the choices that lay ahead. Hidden within her simple sketches was a solution that could revolutionize military aviation, potentially determining the outcome of future conflicts through absolute electromagnetic invisibility. The technology could save countless lives by rendering American aircraft undetectable to enemy defense systems. But it could also destabilize global power balances in ways that were difficult to predict. Her modest apartment in Lancaster reflected the same deliberate ordinariness that characterized her professional persona. Standard furniture from chain stores, generic artwork that came with the rental, and no personal touches that might suggest interests beyond mainstream hobbies. The only hint of her technical background was a small bookshelf containing graduate-level textbooks on electromagnetic theory and material science, volumes that could belong to any mid-level engineer maintaining professional development. Rebecca prepared a simple dinner while considering the implications of her discovery. Tomorrow would bring another day of routine materials testing and incremental improvements, another opportunity to maintain the professional invisibility that had protected her for 7 years. But it would also bring the growing weight of knowledge that could change everything, a solution that demanded action despite the personal risks involved. The choice was becoming clear, even as its consequences remained terrifyingly uncertain. Following Tuesday morning brought an unexpected announcement that rippled through the Advanced Systems Division like electricity through copper wire. Dr. Marcus Whitfield stood before the assembled engineering staff in the main conference auditorium, his expression carrying the weight of classified communications that had arrived during the weekend. Behind him, a projection screen displayed the seal of the Department of Defense, alongside stark red text reading Priority Escalation Project Shadowfall. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitfield began, his voice cutting through the ambient conversations that had filled the room moments earlier. "I've received updated requirements from the Pentagon that significantly alter our development timeline. Intelligence reports indicate that hostile nations have achieved breakthrough advances in radar detection capabilities, specifically targeting current-generation stealth technology. Our window for maintaining air superiority has compressed from 18 months to 6 months. The announcement struck the assembled engineers like a physical blow. 6 months represented an impossibly compressed timeline for implementing the fundamental improvements required to meet operational specifications. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, seated in the front row, visibly paled as she calculated the implications. For her electromagnetic systems team, Dr. Sarah, Kim's expression shifted from concern to something approaching panic as she considered the engine modifications that would be required. Furthermore, Whitfield continued, the performance requirements have been elevated. The Air Force now demands 99.5% radar signature reduction across all frequency bands, including the new detection algorithms that adversaries have recently deployed. This represents a quantum leap beyond our current capabilities. Rebecca sat in her customary position near the back of the auditorium, maintaining the carefully neutral expression that had served her well during years of professional invisibility. Internally, however, her mind was racing through calculations and possibilities. The new requirements were indeed ambitious, but they aligned perfectly with the theoretical capabilities of the solution she had been developing in private. Her simple geometric modifications could potentially achieve the exact performance levels that had just been declared essential for national security. Dr. Timothy Brooks, the division's chief systems engineer, raised his hand with obvious reluctance. At 55, Brooks represented the institutional memory of stealth technology development, having participated in every major advancement since the original F-117 program. His question carried the weight of hard-earned experience. "Marcus, are we certain these requirements are technically achievable? The physics of electromagnetic interaction impose fundamental limits that may not be surmountable through conventional approaches." Whitfield's response was swift and definitive. "The requirements are non-negotiable. Tim, the Pentagon has made it clear that failure to achieve these specifications will result in program cancellation and immediate reassignment of resources to alternative projects. We succeed or project Shadowfall dies." The room fell silent as the full implications settled on the assembled engineers. Project Shadowfall represented the culmination of decades of research and development, employing nearly 300 specialists and consuming budgets measured in billions of dollars. Its cancellation would devastate not only the Lockheed Dynamics facility, but the entire Southern California aerospace community that depended on advanced military contracts. "I'm implementing emergency protocols effective immediately," Whitfield announced. "All teams will transition to 12-hour shifts, 7 days per week. Non-essential projects are suspended. Every available resource will be focused on achieving the new performance specifications within the compressed timeline." As the formal briefing concluded and engineers began filing out of the auditorium, conversations erupted throughout the room. Animated discussions focused on potential solutions, resource allocation, and the daunting challenge of achieving impossible improvements in impossible timeframes. The atmosphere crackled with the desperate energy of brilliant minds confronting an insurmountable challenge. Rebecca gathered her materials slowly, allowing the crowd to thin before making her way toward the exit. Her deliberate pace was partly tactical. She preferred to avoid the crushing press of bodies during mass departures, but also reflective. The morning's announcement had transformed her private theoretical exercise into an urgent national security requirement. The solution hidden in her composition notebook could potentially save Project Shadowfall and preserve American air superiority for the next generation. Rebecca. The voice belonged to Dr. Kevin Martinez, a 31-year-old electromagnetic specialist who had joined the project 18 months earlier after completing his doctorate at Caltech. Martinez embodied the new generation of aerospace engineers, technically brilliant, supremely confident, and utterly convinced that computational modeling could solve any engineering challenge. His approach to stealth technology relied heavily on sophisticated software simulations and exotic materials that pushed the boundaries of manufacturing capability. She turned to face Martinez, who approached with the eager energy of someone convinced he had identified a potential solution to their impossible deadline. "I wanted to run something by you regarding composite material applications," he said, his voice carrying the enthusiasm that had made him popular among junior engineers and project managers alike. "I'm listening," Rebecca replied, maintaining the professionally courteous tone that characterized most of her workplace interactions. "My team has been exploring metamaterial applications for electromagnetic absorption," Martinez explained, gesturing animatedly as his excitement built. "We're talking about engineered structures at the molecular level, designed to trap radar energy and convert it to heat rather than allowing reflection or scattering. The theoretical performance improvements are extraordinary, potentially achieving the exact specifications that Whitfield just announced." Rebecca nodded politely while internally assessing Martinez's proposal. Metamaterial absorption represented a legitimate approach to stealth enhancement, but one that came with significant practical limitations. The manufacturing complexity would be staggering, requiring precision at atomic scales across large surface areas. Power requirements for active metamaterial systems could drain aircraft electrical systems. Most critically, the approach would add substantial weight and cost to production aircraft. "The computational models look promising," Martinez continued, apparently interpreting her silence as engagement rather than skepticism. "We're talking about programmable materials that can adapt their electromagnetic properties in real time, responding to different radar frequencies automatically. It's like giving the aircraft an intelligent skin that knows how to become invisible." Other engineers had begun gravitating toward their conversation, drawn by Martinez's animated discussion of cutting-edge technology. Dr. Angela Foster, a materials specialist from the composites team, joined the growing circle with obvious interest. "Kevin's metamaterial research is fascinating," she interjected. "We're looking at manufacturing techniques that could revolutionize not just stealth technology, but the entire aerospace industry." Rebecca found herself at the center of an impromptu technical discussion as more engineers gathered to hear Martinez's presentation. His enthusiasm was infectious, and his technical knowledge was genuinely impressive. The metamaterial approach represented exactly the kind of sophisticated, technology-forward solution that appealed to engineers who had built their careers on pushing boundaries and exploring theoretical possibilities. The beauty of this approach, Martinez explained to the growing audience, is that it addresses the fundamental physics problem that conventional stealth technology can't solve. Instead of trying to deflect radar energy to safe directions, we eliminate the energy entirely through controlled absorption. No secondary reflections, no ghost signatures, no detectable electromagnetic footprint. Dr. Foster nodded enthusiastically. The manufacturing challenges are significant, but Kevin's team has developed some innovative approaches using additive manufacturing techniques. We're talking about 3D printing metamaterial structures directly onto aircraft surfaces during assembly. Rebecca listened patiently as the discussion expanded to include cost projections, timeline estimates, and implementation strategies. Martinez's proposal was technically sound within its theoretical framework, but she could identify numerous practical obstacles that would likely prove insurmountable within their compressed development schedule. More importantly, his complex solution was attempting to solve a problem that could be addressed through much simpler means. "Rebecca," Martinez said suddenly, apparently remembering her presence in the expanding group, "I'd love to get your perspective on the material aspects of this approach. Your composite expertise could be crucial for determining manufacturing feasibility." The question placed her in a delicate position. Offering substantive technical criticism of Martinez's proposal would require revealing knowledge that extended far beyond her official specialization in structural materials. However, remaining silent could be interpreted as tacit endorsement of an approach that she knew would ultimately fail to meet their requirements. "It's an interesting concept," she replied carefully, choosing words that acknowledged the technical sophistication without committing to enthusiastic support. The manufacturing complexity would be substantial, particularly given our timeline constraints. Martinez's expression shifted slightly, apparently surprised by what he interpreted as lukewarm enthusiasm for his groundbreaking proposal. "Well, yes, there are manufacturing challenges," he conceded, "but that's true of any advanced technology. The computational models clearly demonstrate the performance potential." "Computational models are valuable tools," Rebecca agreed, "but they sometimes overlook practical limitations that become apparent during implementation." The comment drew sharp looks from several engineers in the group, including Dr. Foster, who had invested considerable time in supporting Martinez's research. Rebecca's mild skepticism stood in stark contrast to the enthusiastic reception that typically greeted innovative proposals from the project's rising stars. Dr. James Patterson, a 34-year-old systems integration specialist known for his aggressive approach to technical challenges, stepped forward with obvious irritation. "Rebecca, with all due respect, your background is in structural composites, not electromagnetic systems. Kevin's metamaterial research represents the cutting edge of stealth technology." The condescension in Patterson's voice was unmistakable, reflecting an attitude that Rebecca had encountered repeatedly throughout her tenure at Lockheed Dynamics. Her official specialization in materials engineering placed her outside the glamorous world of electromagnetic theory and stealth physics, relegating her to a support role that was valuable but hardly visionary. "You're absolutely right," Rebecca replied evenly, refusing to rise to the implied challenge. "My expertise is limited to materials applications." Martinez appeared to sense the tension developing within the group and attempted to redirect the conversation toward more collaborative territory. "Actually, materials expertise is exactly what we need to make this work," he said diplomatically. "The metamaterial structures will require substrate materials that can withstand extreme thermal and mechanical stresses while maintaining precise electromagnetic properties. True, Patterson agreed, though his tone suggested he viewed materials engineering as a necessary but mundane aspect of their revolutionary research. But the real breakthrough is in the electromagnetic design. The material's implementation is just an engineering detail. Rebecca felt a familiar surge of frustration at the casual dismissal of material science as mere engineering detail. The attitude reflected a broader hierarchy within the aerospace industry that elevated theoretical research above practical implementation, often leading to elegant solutions that proved impossible to manufacture or deploy. Dr. Lisa Zhang, a junior electromagnetic engineer who had recently joined Patterson's team, added her voice to the discussion. Kevin's approach is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to meet the new requirements. We can't achieve revolutionary performance improvements using conventional methods. The implicit criticism of conventional approaches struck directly at Rebecca's carefully concealed solution, which relied on classical electromagnetic theory rather than exotic materials or complex systems. Her geometric modifications represented precisely the kind of conventional thinking that the group was dismissing as inadequate for their ambitious goals. Revolutionary improvements sometimes come from unexpected directions, Rebecca offered cautiously, testing whether there might be openness to alternative approaches. Martinez nodded politely but continued his technical exposition without pausing. To explore her comment, the metamaterial approach offers controllability that conventional stealth technology simply can't match, he explained. We can program the electromagnetic response for specific threat environments, adapting in real time to new radar systems as they're deployed. Dr. Foster leaned forward with obvious excitement. Imagine aircraft that become more stealthy over time as they encounter new detection systems and automatically adapt their electromagnetic signatures. It's like evolutionary stealth technology. The group's enthusiasm for Martinez's proposal was building toward consensus, with each engineer contributing expertise that supported the metamaterial approach. Rebecca found herself increasingly isolated as the only voice expressing reservations about a solution that was rapidly gaining institutional momentum. Patterson glanced at his watch and announced his intention to schedule an immediate meeting with Dr. Whitfield to present the metamaterial proposal. This could be exactly the breakthrough we need to meet the new requirements, he declared with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his technical judgment validated by management. Kevin, can you have a formal presentation ready by this afternoon? Patterson asked. I want to get this in front of Whitfield before other teams start consuming all the emergency development resources. Martinez nodded eagerly, already mentally organizing the computational models and theoretical projections that would support his proposal. Absolutely. The research foundation is solid, and we can extrapolate performance projections from our existing simulation data. As the group began dispersing to prepare for their presentation to senior management, Dr. Zhang approached Rebecca with what appeared to be genuine curiosity rather than condescension. Rebecca, you seemed hesitant about Kevin's proposal. Are there specific material challenges that concern you? The question offered an opportunity to provide substantive technical feedback without directly challenging the electromagnetic design principles that lay outside her supposed expertise. Rebecca considered her response carefully, recognizing that honest technical criticism could be valuable, even if it revealed more knowledge than her official role would suggest. Metamaterial manufacturing at aircraft scales involves tolerances that push current production capabilities, she explained. Molecular-level precision across square meters of surface area, with quality control that maintains electromagnetic properties under operational stresses. The technical challenges are formidable. Zhang nodded thoughtfully, apparently appreciating the practical perspective that had been largely absent from the morning's enthusiastic discussions. Those are valid concerns. Do you think they're insurmountable given our timeline? Rebecca paused, weighing her words carefully. Direct criticism of Martinez's timeline estimates would position her as an obstacle to innovation rather than a thoughtful contributor to problem solving. However, professional honesty demanded acknowledgement of the manufacturing realities that could derail even the most elegant theoretical solutions. 6 months would be challenging for conventional manufacturing approaches, she replied diplomatically. Revolutionary manufacturing would require longer development cycles. The assessment was delivered in her characteristic, understated style, but Zhang was perceptive enough to recognize the fundamental criticism embedded in the mild language. If metamaterial manufacturing couldn't be implemented within their compressed timeline, the approach would fail regardless of its theoretical elegance. What would you recommend as an alternative approach? Zhang asked, apparently genuine in her interest in Rebecca's perspective. The question struck directly at the heart of Rebecca's dilemma. Her simple geometric solution could potentially achieve the required performance improvements using conventional manufacturing techniques and established materials. However, presenting the alternative would require revealing expertise that extended far beyond structural composites and would inevitably raise questions about her background and qualifications. Sometimes the best solutions are simpler than they appear, Rebecca offered cautiously. Complex problems don't always require complex solutions. Zhang studied her for a moment, apparently sensing that there was more depth to Rebecca's perspective than her official role would suggest. That's an interesting philosophy. Have you given thought to specific approaches that might work within our constraints? Before Rebecca could formulate a response that balanced honesty with discretion, Dr. Patterson's voice cut through their conversation from across the laboratory. Lisa, we need to get moving on the presentation materials. Kevin's metamaterial approach is our best shot at saving this project. Zhang nodded toward Patterson, but returned her attention to Rebecca with obvious reluctance to end their discussion. I'd be interested in hearing more about your perspective sometime, she said quietly. Simple solutions are often the most elegant. As Zhang rejoined Patterson's team to prepare their presentation for senior management, Rebecca remained alone in the laboratory, surrounded by the sophisticated equipment and cutting-edge research that defined Project Shadowfall's mission. The morning's conversations had crystallized the challenge she faced. Her colleagues were pursuing a technically sophisticated but practically problematic solution to a problem that she knew could be solved through much simpler means. The metamaterial approach championed by Martinez and endorsed by Patterson represented everything that the aerospace industry celebrated: cutting-edge technology, sophisticated computational modeling, and revolutionary thinking that pushed theoretical boundaries. Her geometric solution, by contrast, relied on classical physics principles that had been understood for decades, requiring no exotic materials or complex manufacturing processes. The irony was devastating. The simplicity that made her solution practical and implementable within their compressed timeline also made it appear primitive compared to the sophisticated alternatives that were capturing institutional attention and resources. In an industry that rewarded complexity and innovation, elegance could be mistaken for inadequacy. Rebecca returned to her workstation and opened her composition notebook, reviewing the sketches and calculations that contained her hidden solution to Project Shadowfall's impossible requirements. The mathematical relationships were elegant and the geometric principles were sound, but presenting them to colleagues who had just dismissed conventional approaches as inadequate would require careful consideration of timing and presentation. Strategy. Her secure terminal chimed with an incoming message from Dr. Whitfield's administrative assistant, requesting her presence at a materials review meeting scheduled for late afternoon. The meeting would focus on composite substrate requirements for advanced electromagnetic applications, almost certainly related to Martinez's metamaterial proposal. She would be expected to provide technical expertise on manufacturing feasibility and structural integration, supporting a solution that she knew would ultimately fail to meet their requirements. The afternoon stretched ahead with the weight of impossible choices and hidden knowledge that could change everything. The emergency alarm that pierced through the advanced systems division at 3:47 a.m. on Friday morning was unlike anything the Lockheed Dynamics facility had experienced in its 40-year history. Rebecca jolted awake in her Lancaster apartment, her secure phone buzzing with the distinctive pattern that indicated a code-red security alert. The message was brief but chilling. Immediate facility lockdown. All Shadowfall personnel report. Within 60 minutes. Classification, eyes only. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, her mind racing through possibilities that could trigger such an unprecedented response. Code red alerts were reserved for catastrophic security breaches or imminent threats to national security. The fact that all Project Shadowfall personnel were being summoned simultaneously suggested something far beyond routine security protocols. The drive to Palmdale normally took 45 minutes through desert highways, but Rebecca covered the distance in 35. Her aging Honda pushed to limits she hadn't tested since her previous career required rapid responses to classified emergencies. Other vehicles moved through the darkness with similar urgency headlights converging on the facility from all directions as engineers, technicians, and support staff responded to the emergency summons. The Lockheed Dynamics parking lot resembled a staging area for disaster response. Armed security personnel directed incoming vehicles while portable floodlights illuminated checkpoints that hadn't existed 12 hours earlier. Military vehicles bearing Defense Intelligence Agency markings sat alongside unmarked sedans that screamed federal law enforcement. Rebecca recognized the signs of a major security operation, the kind of response that typically followed catastrophic intelligence failures or direct threats to critical defense programs. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the Pentagon's senior liaison to Project Shadowfall, stood in the main conference auditorium when Rebecca arrived. Hayes was a legend within defense circles, career intelligence officer who had coordinated some of the military's most sensitive technological developments. Her presence at Palmdale indicated that whatever crisis had triggered the emergency alert carried implications far beyond normal project management concerns. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Hayes began as the assembled staff settled into their seats. What I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels and will fundamentally alter how we approach Project Shadowfall. At 0200 hours this morning, the USS Gerald Ford detected and successfully tracked a Chinese stealth fighter operating in international waters near Taiwan. The announcement struck the auditorium like a physical blow. For decades, American air superiority had been built on the foundation of undetectable stealth technology. The possibility that adversaries had not only matched but potentially exceeded American capabilities represented a strategic catastrophe that could reshape global power balances overnight. Hayes activated a wall-mounted display that showed radar tracking data from the carrier's advanced detection systems. The signature was unmistakable, a stealth aircraft operating with electromagnetic characteristics that should have made it invisible to conventional radar systems. Instead, the Ford sensors had maintained continuous tracking for over 40 minutes, recording flight patterns and performance data that revealed disturbing technological capabilities. Initial analysis indicates that the aircraft incorporates stealth technology that exceeds anything in our current intelligence databases. Hayes continued, her voice carrying the controlled tension of someone delivering catastrophic news with professional composure. The radar cross-section measurements suggest signature reduction capabilities that surpass our most optimistic projections for enemy technological development. Dr. Whitfield sat in the front row, his face pale as the implications settled. Project Shadowfall had been conceived as a response to anticipated enemy advances, but those projections had assumed a technological gap measured in years rather than months. If the Chinese had already achieved breakthrough stealth capabilities, American air superiority could evaporate within the next decade. Rebecca felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach as she studied the radar data displayed on the screen. The electromagnetic signature patterns were consistent with the kind of destructive interference effects that her geometric solution could generate. Either the Chinese had independently discovered similar principles, or intelligence leaks had compromised American research in ways that threatened not only Project Shadowfall, but national security itself. Hayes gestured toward a second display showing satellite imagery of a remote facility in western China. This is the Lanzhou Advanced Aviation Research Center, where we believe the tracked aircraft was developed. Intelligence suggests that the facility has been operational for less than 18 months, indicating an extremely compressed development. Timeline. The satellite images revealed a sprawling complex that dwarfed even the largest American aerospace facilities. Multiple runways, extensive manufacturing buildings, and what appeared to be large-scale testing facilities suggested a research program operating with resources and urgency that exceeded anything in the American defense establishment. The implications for Project Shadowfall are immediate and severe, Hayes announced. Our current development timeline assumed technological parity with potential adversaries. That assumption is no longer valid. We now face the possibility that enemy stealth capabilities could render our most advanced fighters detectable and vulnerable within the next 2 years. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, the Air Force's technical representative, raised his hand with obvious reluctance. Colonel, are we certain that the detected aircraft represents operational capability rather than experimental testing? The radar tracking could indicate prototype systems that aren't ready for deployment. Hayes shook her head grimly. Flight pattern analysis indicates operational proficiency rather than test procedures. The aircraft demonstrated combat maneuvering, weapons bay operations, and sustained supersonic flight characteristics consistent with production rather than prototype systems. The room fell silent as the full scope of the crisis became apparent. Project Shadowfall wasn't just racing against an artificial deadline. It was attempting to counter enemy capabilities that might already exceed American technological achievements. The comfortable assumption of American technological superiority had been shattered by 40 minutes of radar tracking in the Western Pacific. Dr. Brooks, the chief systems engineer, spoke into the silence with the measured tone of someone who had witnessed multiple technological paradigm shifts during his career. Colonel, what specific guidance are we receiving regarding our current development approach? Do we continue with existing methodologies or pivot to alternative strategies? Hayes consulted a classified briefing document before responding. The Pentagon has authorized emergency protocols that suspend normal development procedures. All theoretical research constraints are lifted. Experimental approaches that were previously considered too risky or unproven are now actively encouraged. We need breakthrough capabilities, not incremental improvements. The authorization represented a fundamental shift in project philosophy, opening doors to radical approaches that had been dismissed as impractical under normal circumstances. Rebecca felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the implications for her hidden solution. The geometric modifications that had seemed too simple for serious consideration might suddenly be viewed as exactly the kind of innovative thinking required. To counter the Chinese breakthrough, Dr. Martinez raised his hand eagerly, apparently seeing opportunity within the crisis. Colonel, MY Metamaterial Research Team has been developing absorption-based stealth technologies that could potentially exceed the performance characteristics you've described. With emergency authorization, we could accelerate implementation timeline significantly. Hayes nodded toward Martinez with polite attention. Doctor, I'd like to hear about any promising approaches. However, I want to emphasize that we're facing an immediate operational timeline. Enemy deployment of advanced stealth capabilities could begin within months rather than years. Martinez stood and activated his laptop, projecting computational models that had been refined since his presentation earlier in the week. Our metamaterial approach can theoretically achieve near-perfect electromagnetic absorption across all relevant frequency bands. The manufacturing challenges are significant, but not insurmountable with emergency resource allocation. The presentation that followed was technically impressive, showcasing sophisticated simulations and theoretical projections that suggested revolutionary performance improvements. Martinez's enthusiasm was infectious, and his command of electromagnetic theory was undeniable. Several engineers nodded approvingly as he outlined implementation strategies and timeline estimates. Rebecca studied the presentation with growing concern, recognizing fundamental flaws that enthusiasm and computational sophistication couldn't overcome. The metamaterial approach required manufacturing precision that exceeded current industrial capabilities, power systems that would compromise aircraft performance, and weight penalties that could negate stealth advantages through reduced operational range. More critically, Martinez's timeline estimates assumed that complex manufacturing processes could be developed, tested, and scaled to production levels within 6 months. Rebecca's experience with classified programs had taught her that revolutionary manufacturing typically required years of development, even with unlimited resources and emergency authorization. Dr. Patterson stood to support Martinez's presentation, adding systems integration perspectives that seemed to address some practical concerns. The beauty of Kevin's approach is scalability, Patterson argued. Once we solve the manufacturing challenges, the same metamaterial principles can be applied to multiple aircraft platforms, potentially revolutionizing our entire stealth fleet. Colonel Hayes listened attentively, but her expression remained professionally neutral. As someone who had overseen the development and deployment of multiple advanced systems, she possessed the experience to distinguish between promising research and practical solutions that could be implemented under emergency conditions. Dr. Martinez, Hayes said when the presentation concluded, "Your research is impressive, but I need realistic assessments of implementation timelines. Based on the Chinese capabilities we observed this morning, we may have months rather than years to field effective countermeasures." Martinez paused, apparently recognizing that his optimistic projections might not survive rigorous scrutiny from experienced program managers. "With emergency authorization and unlimited resources, I believe we could have prototype systems ready for testing within 4 months," he replied, though his voice carried less confidence than his earlier technical exposition. "And full production implementation?" Hayes pressed. 12 to 18 months for initial operational capability," Martinez admitted, his enthusiasm visibly deflating as he acknowledged the practical constraints that computational models couldn't overcome. Hayes made notes in her classified briefing materials, apparently documenting timeline assessments that would be reported to Pentagon leadership. Rebecca could read the colonel's expression clearly enough to recognize that Martinez's estimates had failed to meet the urgency requirements. That drove the emergency response. Dr. Foster stepped forward to support the metamaterial approach from a manufacturing perspective. "Colonel, while the timeline is aggressive, the performance potential justifies extraordinary efforts. We're talking about stealth capabilities that could maintain American air superiority for the next generation." "I appreciate the potential," Hayes replied diplomatically, "but potential capabilities that arrive too late to counter existing threats provide limited strategic value. We need solutions that can be implemented immediately, not technologies that might be available in future years." The colonel's assessment struck directly at the heart of the crisis facing Project Shadowfall. Revolutionary technologies that required extended development cycles were luxuries that current circumstances couldn't accommodate. The Chinese breakthrough had compressed timeline requirements to the point where only immediately implementable solutions could provide meaningful responses to emerging threats. Rebecca felt the weight of decision pressing against her carefully maintained professional anonymity. Her geometric solution could potentially be implemented within weeks rather than months, using conventional manufacturing techniques and established materials. The approach wouldn't require exotic metamaterials or complex power systems, making it practical for immediate deployment across existing aircraft platforms. However, presenting her solution would require revealing expertise that extended far beyond her official specialization, potentially exposing the classified background that she had spent 7 years concealing. The personal risks were enormous, but the national security implications of remaining silent were becoming equally devastating. Dr. Zhang, who had been listening intently to the various presentations, raised her hand with apparent hesitation. "Colonel, are we limiting ourselves to completely revolutionary approaches? Sometimes breakthrough performance can be achieved through innovative applications of established principles." Hayes turned toward Zhang with obvious interest, apparently recognizing the value of pragmatic thinking within an environment that was rapidly polarizing between revolutionary ambition and practical impossibility. "Dr. Zhang, I'm interested in any approach that can provide immediate results. What specifically are you considering?" Zhang glanced toward Rebecca before responding, apparently remembering their earlier conversation about simple solutions to complex problems. "I'm thinking about approaches that leverage classical electromagnetic theory in innovative ways, rather than requiring breakthrough materials or manufacturing processes." The comment hung in the air as various engineers processed its implications. Classical electromagnetic theory was well understood and thoroughly documented, offering the advantage of proven principles that could be implemented using existing industrial capabilities. However, the same familiarity that made classical approaches practical also made them seem inadequate for addressing revolutionary enemy capabilities. Martinez frowned at Zhang's suggestion, apparently viewing it as a retreat from the cutting edge. Thinking that the crisis demanded, "Lisa, classical approaches have already been exhausted by decades of stealth research. If conventional electromagnetic theory could solve these problems, the solutions would have been discovered years ago." Patterson nodded in agreement with Martinez's assessment. "We need paradigm-shifting technologies to counter paradigm-shifting threats. Incremental improvements using established methods won't close the capability gap that Colonel Hayes has described." Rebecca felt the familiar frustration of watching colleagues dismiss approaches that they didn't fully understand. Assumptions that equated familiarity with inadequacy. Her geometric solution represented exactly the kind of classical application that Martinez and Patterson were rejecting, despite its potential to achieve the performance levels that their revolutionary approaches couldn't deliver within practical timelines. Zhang persisted despite the skeptical reception from her colleagues. "I'm not suggesting incremental improvements," she clarified. "I'm thinking about fundamental reconsiderations of how we apply established principles. Sometimes innovation comes from seeing familiar concepts from new perspectives." Colonel Hayes studied Zhang with obvious interest, apparently recognizing wisdom that transcended theoretical sophistication. "Dr. Zhang, do you have specific concepts in mind, or are you speaking hypothetically?" The question placed Zhang in an uncomfortable position, as she had been responding more to intuition than specific technical proposals. She glanced again toward Rebecca, apparently hoping for support from someone who had expressed similar philosophical perspectives about simple solutions. Rebecca faced the moment of decision that had been building since the morning's crisis announcement. Her geometric solution could potentially provide the breakthrough capability that Colonel Hayes required, implemented within timelines that could respond to immediate threats rather than future possibilities. However, presenting the approach would require stepping out of the professional shadows that had protected her for 7 years. The choice crystallized with sudden clarity as she considered the implications of continued silence. American pilots could face enemy aircraft equipped with stealth technology that exceeded their own defensive capabilities. Air superiority that had been taken for granted for decades could evaporate within months, potentially determining the outcomes of future conflicts through technological advantage rather than tactical excellence. She stood slowly, feeling dozens of eyes turned toward her with expressions ranging from curiosity to surprise. Her reputation as a quiet materials engineer made her participation in strategic discussions unexpected, but the crisis had created an environment where unconventional perspectives were being actively solicited. "Colonel Hayes," Rebecca said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that surprised several colleagues who had never heard her speak with anything beyond professional politeness. "I may have an approach that could meet your timeline requirements, while achieving the performance characteristics you've described." The auditorium fell silent as the full attention of Project Shadowfall's leadership focused on the unassuming engineer, who had just claimed possession of a solution to their impossible crisis. The silence that followed Rebecca's declaration stretched for what felt like minutes but lasted only seconds. Colonel Hayes leaned forward in her chair, her experienced eyes assessing the quiet engineer, who had just claimed to possess a solution that had eluded the industry's most brilliant minds. Around the auditorium, expressions ranged from skeptical amusement to barely concealed irritation that someone outside the electromagnetic specialty was presuming to offer breakthrough solutions. Dr. Martinez was the first to break the silence, his voice carrying a mixture of disbelief and professional condescension. "Rebecca, I appreciate your willingness to contribute, but electromagnetic stealth technology requires deep specialization in wave theory and materials physics. This isn't really an area where composite materials expertise translates directly." Several engineers nodded in agreement, apparently sharing Martinez's assessment that Rebecca was overstepping her professional boundaries. During a critical national security briefing, Dr. Patterson's expression showed barely disguised annoyance at what he perceived as an interruption of serious technical discussions by someone whose qualifications didn't extend to electromagnetic systems. Rebecca felt the familiar weight of professional skepticism, the automatic dismissal that had protected her anonymity for 7 years, but now threatened to prevent her from contributing to a solution that could save lives. She understood their perspective. Her official background in structural composites provided no obvious foundation for revolutionary breakthroughs in stealth technology. "I understand your concerns," Rebecca replied, maintaining the calm professionalism that had served her well through years of being underestimated. "However, I believe you might find my approach interesting despite its apparent simplicity." Colonel Hayes raised her hand slightly, a gesture that immediately silenced the murmurs of skepticism rippling through the assembled engineers. Her decades of experience managing advanced technology programs had taught her to recognize potential breakthroughs regardless of their source, and something in Rebecca's quiet confidence suggested substance beyond empty claims. Dr. Chun Hayes sighed, using Rebecca's formal title in a way that carried implicit authority. "I'm interested in hearing your proposal. Given the crisis we're facing, we can't afford to dismiss any potentially viable approach." The colonel's support provided Rebecca with the opening she needed, though it also placed her under intense scrutiny from colleagues who were eager to expose the limitations of her supposedly revolutionary solution. She walked to the front of the auditorium, her worn messenger bag seeming out of place in the high-tech environment, but containing the composition notebook that held her carefully developed concepts. "The fundamental challenge with current stealth technology," Rebecca began, her voice gaining strength as she shifted into technical exposition mode, "is that we're fighting electromagnetic waves rather than working with them. Every deflection, every scattering angle, Every attempt to redirect radar energy creates secondary effects that sophisticated detection systems can identify. She opened her notebook and extracted several hand-drawn diagrams, placing them on the document projector. That displayed her sketches on the main screen. The drawings appeared almost primitive compared to the sophisticated computer models that had dominated previous presentations, simple geometric shapes and basic mathematical relationships that could have been produced by an undergraduate physics student. Dr. Foster leaned toward Martinez and whispered loud enough for nearby engineers to hear. Those look like freshman-level electromagnetic diagrams. What exactly is she proposing that we haven't already considered? Rebecca continued her presentation without acknowledging the commentary, her focus entirely on communicating concepts that she had been refining in isolation for weeks. Instead of trying to deflect radar energy away from aircraft surfaces, what if we could make it interfere with itself? Create destructive interference patterns that eliminate reflection rather than redirecting it? The question hung in the air as engineers processed its implications. Destructive interference was indeed a fundamental principle of wave physics, but applying it to large-scale electromagnetic signatures required precise control over surface geometry that had traditionally been considered impractical for aircraft applications. Dr. Zhang studied Rebecca's diagrams with growing interest, apparently recognizing mathematical relationships that weren't immediately obvious to casual observation. "You're proposing surface modifications that create phase cancellation," she said, her voice carrying surprised respect. "The incoming radar wave generates a return signal that's exactly out of phase with the reflection from adjacent surfaces." "Precisely," Rebecca confirmed, pointing to specific geometric features in her sketches. "By carefully controlling the spacing and angles of surface elements, we can ensure that reflected waves cancel each other rather than combining to create detectable signatures." Martinez frowned as he studied the projected diagrams, clearly struggling to understand how such elementary concepts could address the sophisticated challenges that his metamaterial research was designed to solve. "Rebecca, destructive interference has been explored extensively in stealth research. The practical challenges of maintaining precise geometric relationships across large aircraft surfaces make it impractical for real-world applications." Rebecca nodded acknowledgement of his concern while activating her laptop to display more detailed calculations that had been hidden behind her simple sketches. The screen filled with complex mathematical analyses showing how specific geometric ratios could maintain destructive interference across multiple radar frequencies simultaneously. "The key insight," Rebecca explained, "is that we don't need perfect geometric precision across the entire aircraft surface. We only need precision in critical areas where radar signatures are typically strongest: leading edges, engine intakes, and surface discontinuities. Strategic application of interference geometry in these locations can eliminate the dominant reflection sources." The mathematical analysis displayed on screen was far more sophisticated than her initial sketches had suggested, incorporating advanced wave theory and electromagnetic modeling that demonstrated deep expertise in stealth physics. Several engineers leaned forward with obvious surprise, apparently reassessing their assumptions about Rebecca's technical qualifications. Colonel Hayes studied the calculations with the practiced eye of someone who had evaluated countless technical proposals during her career. "Dr. Chun, these analyses appear quite comprehensive. How long have you been developing this approach?" The question struck directly at the heart of Rebecca's carefully maintained professional anonymity. Honest explanation of her research timeline would require acknowledging expertise that extended far beyond her official role as a materials engineer, potentially exposing the classified background that she had spent years concealing. "I've been exploring these concepts during personal research time," Rebecca replied carefully, choosing words that were technically accurate while avoiding specifics that could raise Uncomfortable questions about her background. Dr. Brooks, the chief systems engineer, raised his hand with obvious skepticism. Rebecca, the mathematical analysis is impressive, but practical implementation would require manufacturing tolerances that exceed current aerospace capabilities. How do you propose to maintain the geometric precision required for destructive interference? The question represented exactly the kind of practical challenge that had led Rebecca to develop her approach using conventional manufacturing rather than exotic materials or complex systems. Her solution relied on geometric relationships that could be achieved through standard machining and forming processes rather than molecular-level precision. The beauty of this approach, Rebecca explained, advancing to a new slide that showed manufacturing specifications, is that it doesn't require revolutionary precision. The geometric relationships can be maintained using conventional aerospace manufacturing, with tolerances that are well within current industry standards. Patterson studied the manufacturing specifications with obvious disbelief. You're claiming that standard machining processes can achieve the surface precision required for electromagnetic interference control. That contradicts everything we understand about stealth manufacturing requirements. Rebecca had anticipated this objection and was prepared with detailed engineering analyses that demonstrated how strategic placement of interference features could compensate for normal manufacturing variations. Her approach didn't require perfect precision because it incorporated tolerance margins into the basic geometric design. Conventional stealth technology requires precise angles and smooth surfaces because it relies on predictable reflection patterns, Rebecca explained. Interference-based stealth is actually more robust because small variations in geometry simply shift the interference patterns without eliminating them entirely. Dr. Zhang stood and approached the projection screen, studying Rebecca's manufacturing specifications with obvious fascination. "This is brilliant," she said, her voice carrying genuine admiration. "You're using the manufacturing variations as part of the design rather than fighting against them." The observation drew surprised looks from several engineers who were beginning to recognize that Rebecca's supposedly simple approach incorporated sophisticated understanding of both electromagnetic theory and practical manufacturing constraints. Her solution appeared to address multiple challenges simultaneously rather than solving one problem while creating others. Martinez remained skeptical, apparently reluctant to abandon his metamaterial research in favor of an approach that seemed to contradict the cutting-edge thinking that had defined his career. Even if the manufacturing is feasible, he argued, conventional materials can't provide the electromagnetic performance required to counter the Chinese capabilities that Colonel Hayes described. Rebecca had expected this challenge and advanced to her most crucial slide: computational models showing electromagnetic performance projections for her interference-based design. The numbers were staggering, predicting radar signature reductions that exceeded even the most optimistic goals for metamaterial approaches. "Actually," Rebecca said quietly, "the performance projections suggest near-complete electromagnetic invisibility across all relevant frequency bands. Not absorption or deflection, but genuine cancellation that leaves virtually no detectable signature." The auditorium fell silent as engineers processed the implications of her claim. Near-complete electromagnetic invisibility represented the holy grail of stealth technology, a capability that could render aircraft truly undetectable rather than merely difficult to track. Colonel Hayes leaned forward with obvious interest, her expression shifting from polite attention to focused engagement. "Dr. Chun, are you stating that this approach could achieve the performance levels required to counter the Chinese breakthrough we observed this morning?" Rebecca paused, recognizing the weight of the moment and the implications of her response. The geometric modifications she had developed could indeed provide the capabilities that Colonel Hayes required, potentially restoring American air superiority. through elegant application of classical physics principles. Based on my analysis, Rebecca replied carefully, this approach could potentially exceed the performance characteristics of any stealth technology currently in development, including the system we observed on the Chinese aircraft. The claim was extraordinary, suggesting that a quiet materials engineer had single-handedly solved problems that had consumed billions of dollars in research funding and decades of theoretical development. Several engineers exchanged incredulous glances, apparently struggling to accept that such a revolutionary breakthrough could emerge from someone they had previously dismissed as a support specialist. Dr. Foster stood with obvious agitation, her voice carrying the frustration of someone whose professional worldview was being challenged by unexpected developments. Rebecca, with all due respect, you're making claims that contradict the fundamental assumptions underlying stealth research. If your approach is so effective, why hasn't it been discovered by the hundreds of electromagnetic specialists who have worked on these problems? The question struck at the heart of Rebecca's dilemma, explaining why her solution had remained hidden and required revealing background information that could expose her classified past. However, the crisis facing Project Shadowfall had created circumstances where national security considerations outweighed personal protection. Sometimes, Rebecca replied slowly, the most effective solutions are hidden in plain sight. Classical electromagnetic theory contains principles that haven't been fully explored for stealth applications because the industry has focused on more complex approaches. Patterson shook his head with obvious frustration. That's not an answer. Rebecca, you're claiming that every electromagnetic engineer in the defense industry has overlooked fundamental principles that should be apparent to anyone with basic wave theory knowledge. Rebecca felt the pressure of questions that were approaching dangerous territory, inquiries that could force her to acknowledge expertise that officially didn't exist. However, Colonel Hayes's presence and the urgency of their national security crisis provided justification for revelations that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. My background in electromagnetic theory extends beyond what's reflected in my official personnel files, Rebecca admitted, her voice carrying the weight of carefully guarded secrets. I've had opportunities to explore these concepts in contexts that aren't widely documented. The admission sent ripples of surprise through the assembled engineers, many of whom were beginning to realize that their quiet colleague possessed hidden depths that contradicted her carefully cultivated image as an unremarkable materials specialist. Colonel Hayes studied Rebecca with the penetrating attention of an intelligence professional who recognized the significance of what had just been acknowledged. Dr. Chun, are you indicating that you have previous experience with classified stealth research that isn't reflected in your current assignment? Rebecca met the colonel's gaze directly, recognizing that further evasion would undermine the credibility required to advance her solution during a national security crisis. Yes, Colonel. My previous work involved applications that required deep specialization in electromagnetic stealth technology. The revelation transformed the atmosphere in the auditorium as engineers reassessed their assumptions about someone they had worked alongside for years without truly understanding her qualifications. Rebecca Chun, the quiet materials engineer with worn boots and faded clothing, was revealing herself as something entirely different from the professional persona she had maintained. Dr. Whitfield spoke for the first time since the emergency briefing had begun, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who was beginning to understand the implications of what they were witnessing. Rebecca, are you stating that you've been conducting advanced stealth research while assigned to materials engineering duties? I've been exploring concepts that build on previous research experience, Rebecca replied carefully, maintaining the balance between honesty and operational security that classified backgrounds required. The geometric approach I've presented represents the culmination of theoretical work that began several years ago. Martinez stared at Rebecca with obvious disbelief. apparently struggling to reconcile her modest appearance and unremarkable official role with claims of revolutionary breakthrough capabilities. You're saying that you've been working on electromagnetic, stealth technology while the rest of us pursued metamaterial and absorption-based approaches. Why didn't you present these concepts earlier? The question cut directly to the core of Rebecca's professional strategy, the deliberate anonymity that had protected her from the attention that could prove dangerous for someone with her background. However, the Chinese breakthrough had created circumstances where continued secrecy could have consequences that extended far beyond personal safety. Sometimes, Rebecca said quietly, the most important work happens in the background, away from institutional attention and competitive pressures. Innovation doesn't always require public recognition or career advancement. Colonel Hayes stood slowly, her expression reflecting the decision-making process of someone who had spent decades evaluating technical claims and personnel capabilities under pressure. Dr. Chun, I need to understand the practical timeline for implementing your approach. Can this interference-based stealth modification be deployed within our compressed schedule? Rebecca felt the weight of the moment as dozens of eyes focused on her response. The geometric modifications she had developed could indeed be implemented rapidly using conventional manufacturing processes, potentially providing immediate solutions to threats that other approaches would require months or years to address. The implementation timeline would be measured in weeks rather than months, Rebecca replied, her voice carrying quiet confidence in capabilities that she had spent years developing in secret. Initial prototypes could be ready for testing within 2 weeks, with production modifications possible within 30 days. The timeline estimate sent shockwaves through the assembled engineers, representing implementation speeds that seemed impossible for revolutionary technology but could be achieved through careful application of established manufacturing processes to innovative design concepts. Colonel Hayes nodded slowly, apparently recognizing that Rebecca's approach offered exactly the kind of immediate solution that their crisis demanded. Dr. Chun, I'm authorizing immediate development of your interference-based approach under emergency protocols. You'll have unlimited resources and priority access to all necessary facilities. The authorization represented a complete transformation of Rebecca's professional status, elevating her from marginalized support engineer to lead researcher on the most critical defense program in the country. Around the auditorium, colleagues who had dismissed her as unremarkable were beginning to understand that they had severely underestimated someone whose quiet competence concealed extraordinary capabilities. Rebecca accepted the colonel's authorization with the same measured professionalism that had characterized her response to years of being overlooked and undervalued. Thank you, Colonel. I'll begin immediate preparations for prototype development. As the emergency briefing concluded and engineers began dispersing to implement the new research priorities, Rebecca remained at the front of the auditorium, surrounded by the diagrams and calculations that had finally revealed her hidden expertise. To colleagues who were still struggling to understand what they had witnessed, the quiet materials engineer with the worn messenger bag had just claimed responsibility for potentially saving American air superiority. But the full scope of her capabilities remained concealed behind layers of classification and carefully guarded secrets that would require even greater revelations to fully understand. 3 days after, Colonel Hayes authorized Rebecca's emergency development program, the secure conference room adjacent to her newly assigned laboratory buzzed with activity that would have been unimaginable a week earlier. Rebecca sat at the head of a polished table surrounded by Project Shadowfall's senior leadership, her worn messenger bag replaced by a classified briefing folder marked with security classifications that hadn't appeared on Lockheed Dynamics documents. In over a decade, the transformation in her professional status had been swift and dramatic. Within hours of the colonel's authorization, Rebecca had been reassigned from her corner workstation in Laboratory 7 Echo to the facility's most advanced research suite, complete with dedicated technical staff and access to computational resources, typically reserved for the most critical defense programs. The quiet materials engineer who had been overlooked for years now commanded authority that exceeded most senior researchers. Dr. Marcus Whitfield entered the conference room carrying his own classified materials, his expression reflecting the bewilderment of someone whose professional world had been fundamentally altered by unexpected developments. As project director, he had been forced to rapidly reassess personnel assignments and research priorities based on Rebecca's emergence as the program's potential savior. "Rebecca," Whitfield began, settling into his chair with obvious discomfort. "At the reversed power dynamics, the preliminary test results from your prototype modifications are generating significant attention at the Pentagon. Colonel Hayes has requested a comprehensive briefing on your background and the theoretical foundation underlying your approach." Rebecca nodded, understanding that the moment for partial revelations and careful evasions had passed. The success of her initial prototype tests had attracted scrutiny from intelligence agencies and defense officials who possessed the clearance levels required to access her complete personnel files. The comfortable anonymity that had protected her for 7 years was about to be permanently shattered. "Before we proceed," she said carefully, "I want to emphasize that certain aspects of my background involve classification levels that exceed standard Project Shadowfall clearances. Full disclosure will require additional security protocols." The statement sent ripples of surprise through the assembled engineers, most of whom held secret or top-secret clearances that they had assumed represented the highest levels of defense classification. Rebecca's implication that her background involved even more restricted information suggested involvement in programs that operated at the shadowy edges of acknowledged government research. Colonel Hayes entered the room accompanied by a stern-faced man in his 50s whose unmarked credentials and obvious authority indicated senior intelligence community involvement. Rebecca recognized the type immediately, a career spook whose presence signaled that her carefully buried past was about to be exhumed by professionals who specialized in uncovering hidden information. "Ladies and gentlemen," Colonel Hayes announced, "this is Deputy Director William Armstrong from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Director Armstrong has been granted special access to review classified personnel information relevant to our current crisis." Armstrong studied Rebecca with the calculating attention of someone who had spent decades evaluating individuals whose official identities concealed more complex realities. His presence indicated that intelligence agencies had been conducting background investigations that extended far beyond normal security protocols. "Dr. Chun," Armstrong began, consulting a thick folder that bore more classification markings than most engineers had ever seen, "your current assignment as a materials engineer represents only the most recent phase of a career that has involved some of the most classified stealth research programs in recent military history." The statement hung in the air as Project Shadowfall's leadership processed its implications. Rebecca maintained her professional composure while internally preparing for revelations that would permanently alter her relationships with colleagues who had known her only as a quiet support engineer. Armstrong opened his folder and extracted several documents that he arranged on the table with deliberate precision. "Your doctorate from Stanford focused on electromagnetic metamaterials and stealth applications, with a dissertation that was immediately classified upon completion. Your early career involved assignment to the Advanced Research Projects Agency, where you participated in developing stealth technologies that remain classified 2 decades later." Dr. Martinez leaned forward with obvious fascination, apparently beginning to understand why Rebecca's technical knowledge had seemed to exceed her official specialization. "You worked for DARPA? On what kind of programs?" Armstrong consulted his documentation before responding. Dr. Chun was the lead researcher on Project Ghost Protocol, a classified program that explored electromagnetic signature elimination through quantum interference applications. The project was terminated following breakthrough discoveries that were deemed too sensitive for continued development. The room fell silent as the engineers processed the implications of what they were hearing. Project Ghost Protocol was legendary within defense circles as a theoretical research program that had reportedly achieved revolutionary advances in stealth technology before being abruptly discontinued for unexplained reasons. Rebecca felt the familiar weight of secrets that had shaped her professional life for over a decade, classified achievements that had been buried so deeply that even their existence was considered dangerous information. Ghost Protocol represented the pinnacle of her research career, work that had pushed electromagnetic theory into territories that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of detection and concealment. Director Armstrong, Dr. Whitfield, said carefully, "Are you indicating that Rebecca's current approach builds on research that was developed during Ghost Protocol?" Armstrong nodded gravely. Dr. Chun's interference-based stealth modifications represent a practical application of theoretical principles that were explored during Ghost Protocol. The geometric approach she has presented is essentially a simplified version of quantum interference concepts that were deemed too advanced for implementation 15 years ago. Dr. Zhang studied Rebecca with newfound respect and understanding. "That's why your solutions seemed so elegant. You weren't developing new concepts. You were adapting existing theoretical work that most of us have never encountered." Rebecca recognized that continued silence would serve no purpose now that intelligence agencies had decided to declassify aspects of her background. The crisis facing American air superiority had apparently convinced senior officials that operational necessity outweighed the security concerns that had originally buried Ghost Protocol. Project Ghost Protocol explored the possibility of achieving true electromagnetic invisibility through controlled quantum interference. Rebecca explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years developing concepts that existed at the cutting edge of theoretical physics. "We discovered that electromagnetic waves could be manipulated at the quantum level to create perfect destructive interference, essentially making objects disappear from detection systems." The technical explanation drew sharp intakes of breath from several engineers who recognized the revolutionary implications of quantum-level electromagnetic control. Such capabilities would represent advances beyond anything in current scientific literature, suggesting that classified research had achieved breakthroughs that were decades ahead of acknowledged technological development. Martinez stared at Rebecca with obvious awe. "You're talking about quantum stealth technology? Manipulating electromagnetic waves at the subatomic level?" "The theoretical foundation was sound," Rebecca confirmed, "but the practical implementation required technologies that didn't exist 15 years ago. We could demonstrate the principles in laboratory conditions, but scaling to aircraft applications was impossible with available manufacturing and computational resources." Director Armstrong leaned forward, his expression indicating that the conversation was approaching information that remained highly classified despite the emergency briefing. "Dr. Chun, what specific discoveries led to the termination of the Ghost Protocol?" Rebecca paused, recognizing that her response would reveal information that had been buried for reasons extending beyond technological limitations. Ghost Protocol hadn't been terminated due to implementation challenges. It had been discontinued because the research team had achieved breakthroughs that were considered too dangerous for continued development. "We discovered that quantum electromagnetic manipulation could theoretically be applied to detection as well as concealment," Rebecca said quietly. "The same principles that could make aircraft invisible could potentially be used to penetrate any existing stealth technology." The implications for global military balance were considered destabilizing. The revelation struck the room like a physical blow as engineers realized that Rebecca's research had achieved capabilities that could revolutionize both offensive and defensive applications of electromagnetic technology. Quantum stealth detection would render all existing stealth aircraft vulnerable, fundamentally altering the strategic calculations that had defined military planning for decades. Colonel Hayes absorbed this information with the practiced composure of someone who had spent her career managing classified programs with far-reaching implications. Dr. Chun, are you indicating that your current geometric approach represents a practical implementation of Ghost Protocol discoveries? A simplified implementation, Rebecca clarified. The geometric modifications achieve similar results through classical rather than quantum mechanisms. We're using surface interference patterns to simulate quantum-level effects, providing significant performance improvements without requiring the exotic technologies that made Ghost Protocol impractical. Dr. Brooks, who had remained silent throughout the classified briefing, finally spoke with the measured tone of someone whose decades of experience had taught him to recognize paradigm-shifting developments. Rebecca, if your classical approach can approximate quantum stealth effects, why haven't similar concepts been explored by other research programs? The question struck at the heart of the institutional barriers that had prevented widespread exploration of Ghost Protocol principles. Rebecca's unique position as both a Ghost Protocol alumna and someone operating outside mainstream stealth research had provided her with perspectives that were unavailable to researchers working within conventional frameworks. Ghost Protocol was so highly classified that most electromagnetic researchers never gained access to the theoretical foundation, Rebecca explained. The few researchers who were involved were typically reassigned to other programs after the project's termination, preventing continued development of the underlying concepts. Director Armstrong consulted his classified materials before adding additional context that explained the unusual career path that had led Rebecca to her current position. Dr. Chun's reassignment to materials engineering was part of a deliberate strategy to distance Ghost Protocol alumni from electromagnetic research while maintaining their security clearances and technical expertise. The explanation revealed that Rebecca's professional exile hadn't been punitive but protective, designed to preserve valuable human resources while ensuring that Ghost Protocol concepts remained dormant until circumstances demanded their resurrection. Her years of apparent career stagnation had actually been a form of deep cover, maintaining her capabilities while preventing unauthorized development of dangerous technologies. Dr. Foster leaned back in her chair with obvious amazement at the piety revelations that were transforming her understanding of a colleague she had worked alongside for years. So you've been hiding breakthrough stealth capabilities for 7 years, waiting for the right moment to reveal them? I've been refining classical applications of quantum principles, Rebecca corrected. The geometric approach I've developed doesn't require the exotic technologies that made Ghost Protocol impractical, but it achieves many of the same performance objectives through careful application of wave interference theory. Martinez shook his head in apparent disbelief at the scope of what had been concealed within their midst. This explains why your mathematical analyses were so sophisticated. You weren't developing new concepts. You were translating existing theoretical work into practical applications. Rebecca nodded acknowledgement while recognizing that the full scope of her achievements extended beyond mere translation of existing concepts. The geometric approach represented genuine innovation that bridged the gap between revolutionary theory and implementable technology, requiring insights that had emerged from years of careful analysis and refinement. Colonel Hayes studied the classified documentation that Director Armstrong had provided, apparently assessing the implications of revelations that were reshaping her understanding of both Rebecca's capabilities and the strategic options available for countering the Chinese breakthrough. Dr. Chun, the colonel said finally, based on your Ghost Protocol background and the prototype results we've observed, What is your assessment of the Chinese stealth technology that triggered our current crisis? Rebecca had been expecting this question since the intelligence briefing 3 days earlier, and her analysis painted a disturbing picture of technological development that appeared to parallel her own research trajectory. The electromagnetic signatures observed by the USS Gerald Ford were consistent with implementation of principles that bore striking similarities to Ghost Protocol concepts. The Chinese aircraft demonstrates electromagnetic characteristics that suggest quantum interference applications. Rebecca replied carefully. The signature patterns are consistent with controlled destructive interference, rather than conventional deflection or absorption approaches. The assessment sent chills through the assembled leadership as they realized that America's technological adversaries had apparently achieved independent breakthroughs in areas that had been considered uniquely advanced American research capabilities. Director Armstrong's expression darkened as he processed the implications of Rebecca's analysis. Are you suggesting that the Chinese have developed quantum stealth technology independently, or that they may have gained access to Ghost Protocol research? Rebecca considered the question carefully, recognizing that her response could have profound implications for intelligence assessments and national security strategies. The electromagnetic patterns she had observed in the classified tracking data could result from either independent research breakthroughs or successful intelligence penetration of American classified programs. The implementation appears too sophisticated for independent development within their reported timeline, Rebecca said finally. However, the specific applications suggest adaptation rather than direct copying, indicating that they may have accessed theoretical concepts but developed their own practical implementations. The assessment painted a complex picture of technological espionage and competitive development that highlighted both the sophistication of enemy intelligence operations and the continuing American advantages that could be leveraged through rapid deployment of Rebecca's geometric approach. Colonel Hayes stood and paced to the window overlooking the Mojave Desert testing ranges where experimental aircraft had been pushing technological boundaries for decades. Dr. Chun, given your unique background and current capabilities, what do you recommend as our strategic response to this threat? Rebecca recognized that her answer would shape not only Project Shadowfall's immediate development priorities, but potentially influence American defense strategy for the coming decades. The geometric modifications she had developed could provide immediate tactical advantages, but the broader implications required consideration of long-term technological competition with adversaries who had demonstrated unexpected capabilities. Immediate deployment of interference-based modifications to existing aircraft platforms, Rebecca replied without hesitation. The geometric approach can be implemented rapidly across our current fleet, providing enhanced stealth capabilities within weeks, rather than years. Simultaneously, we should accelerate development of next-generation applications that could restore decisive technological advantages. The strategy balanced immediate tactical requirements with longer-term strategic considerations, leveraging Rebecca's classical innovations to address current threats while positioning American research to maintain technological superiority in an increasingly competitive environment. Director Armstrong closed his classified folder with obvious satisfaction at having finally revealed information that had been concealed for over a decade. Dr. Chun, the intelligence community is authorizing full disclosure of your Ghost Protocol background to support Project Shadowfall's enhanced mission requirements. Your previous research classification has been modified to support current operational necessities. The authorization represented more than administrative convenience. It signaled that Rebecca's professional exile was officially ending, replaced by full integration into the most critical defense programs with access to resources and authority that reflected her actual capabilities rather than her carefully constructed cover identity. Dr. Whitfield stood and extended his hand toward Rebecca, with obvious respect for someone whose hidden expertise had potentially saved both Project Shadowfall and American air superiority. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology for underestimating your capabilities. Your contributions to this program have been extraordinary." Rebecca accepted the handshake while maintaining the professional modesty that had characterized her interactions throughout years of concealment and recent revelation. "The work speaks for itself," she replied simply. "Our focus should remain on implementation rather than recognition." As the classified briefing concluded and the project leadership prepared to implement the strategic changes that Rebecca's revelations had necessitated, she remained seated at the conference table, surrounded by documentation that had finally revealed the truth about her extraordinary background to colleagues who were still processing the scope of what they had learned. The quiet materials engineer with the worn messenger bag had been revealed as one of the most advanced stealth researchers in the country. Someone whose hidden capabilities could determine the outcome of technological competition that would shape global power balances for generations. 2 weeks after Rebecca's background revelation, the pre-dawn darkness over Edwards Air Force Base was shattered by the distinctive thunder of an F-35 Lightning II, pushing through the sound barrier at 38,000 feet. But this wasn't an ordinary test flight. This aircraft carried Rebecca's geometric modifications integrated into its stealth surfaces, representing the first real-world validation of quantum interference principles translated into practical aerospace engineering. In the underground command bunker beneath Edwards, Rebecca stood before a wall of displays that would determine whether her years of hidden research could counter the Chinese breakthrough that had triggered their crisis. The test represented more than technical validation. It would demonstrate whether American air superiority could be preserved through innovative application of classical physics principles to revolutionary stealth challenges. Colonel Hayes monitored the test from the command center's primary console, surrounded by radar operators whose equipment had been calibrated to detect even the most advanced stealth signatures. The testing protocol was designed to push Rebecca's modifications beyond their theoretical limits, subjecting them to detection attempts that simulated the most sophisticated enemy radar systems in existence. "Ghost Rider, this is Control," the test director announced through encrypted communications. "Proceed to Waypoint Alpha for initial signature testing. Activate all electromagnetic countermeasures and maintain standard stealth protocols." Major Sarah Williams, the Air Force's most experienced stealth test pilot, acknowledged the instructions while maneuvering her modified F-35 into position above the Mojave Desert's sprawling test ranges. Williams had been briefed on the revolutionary nature of Rebecca's modifications, but remained skeptical that geometric surface changes could achieve the performance improvements that computational models had predicted. "Control, Ghost Rider is in position at Waypoint Alpha," Williams reported. "All systems nominal, electromagnetic signature monitoring active." Rebecca watched the radar displays with the focused intensity of someone whose reputation and the nation's security depended on the next few minutes of testing. The screens showed multiple detection systems attempting to acquire and track Williams' aircraft, using every frequency band and scanning technique in the American military inventory. The results were immediate and stunning, where conventional F-35 operations typically generated minimal but detectable radar signatures. Williams' modified aircraft produced virtually nothing. The sophisticated detection systems that had been designed to track even the most advanced stealth aircraft were registering empty sky, despite the presence of a $30 million fighter jet operating directly overhead. Dr. Martinez, who had been monitoring the test from the engineering station, stared at his displays with obvious disbelief. "The radar cross-section measurements are showing values below our instrument sensitivity," he announced, his voice carrying the amazement of someone witnessing the impossible. "We're not detecting scatter, absorption, or deflection. We're seeing genuine electromagnetic invisibility." Colonel Hayes leaned forward to study the detection data. Her decades of experience with advanced military systems, providing context for measurements that seemed to defy physical reality. Are we certain the equipment is functioning correctly? These readings suggest complete electromagnetic signature elimination. Rebecca had expected the skepticism that accompanied results which exceeded even her most optimistic projections. The geometric modifications were performing better than theoretical models had predicted, achieving interference patterns that approached the quantum-level effects she had explored during Ghost Protocol while using nothing more sophisticated than carefully calculated surface angles. The equipment is functioning correctly, Rebecca confirmed, consulting her own monitoring displays that showed the electromagnetic interactions occurring around Williams' aircraft. The geometric modifications are creating destructive interference, patterns that cancel reflected signals before they can return to detection systems. The test director's voice crackled through the command center speakers as he directed Williams through increasingly challenging detection scenarios. Ghost Rider, proceed to waypoint Bravo for multi-frequency scanning. We're activating every radar system in the test range simultaneously. Williams banked her modified F-35 toward the new coordinates while multiple ground-based radar installations focused their combined scanning power on her aircraft. The test represented the kind of coordinated detection effort that enemy forces would deploy against American stealth aircraft during actual combat operations. Control, Ghost Rider approaching waypoint Bravo, Williams reported. I can see the radar installations below, but my threat warning systems aren't detecting any illumination. Either their equipment is malfunctioning or your modifications are working better than advertised. Rebecca smiled at Williams' unconscious acknowledgement of what the pilot was experiencing, an aircraft that remained invisible even to its own defensive systems because no radar energy was returning to trigger threat warnings. The geometric modifications weren't just hiding the aircraft from enemy detection. They were achieving true electromagnetic stealth that rendered radar systems effectively blind. Dr. Jang studied the multi-frequency test results with growing excitement, her understanding of electromagnetic theory providing appreciation for the revolutionary nature of what they were witnessing. Rebecca, the interference patterns are maintaining coherence across every frequency band simultaneously. How is that possible with purely geometric modifications? The question struck at the heart of why Rebecca's approach succeeded where more complex alternatives had failed. Rather than trying to address each radar frequency separately, her geometric design created interference relationships that were inherently broadband, automatically adapting to any electromagnetic wavelength without requiring active control systems. Classical wave interference follows mathematical relationships that are independent of specific frequencies, Rebecca explained. By designing geometric ratios that create destructive interference across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, we achieve broadband stealth without requiring frequency-specific countermeasures. The elegance of the solution impressed even those engineers who had initially dismissed Rebecca's approach as overly simplistic. Her modifications achieved revolutionary performance through application of fundamental physics principles rather than exotic technologies, demonstrating that breakthrough capabilities could emerge from innovative thinking rather than complex engineering. The test director's voice interrupted their technical discussion with instructions that would push Rebecca's modifications to their absolute limits. Ghost Rider, proceed to waypoint Charlie for the advanced detection protocol. We're activating experimental radar systems that simulate next-generation enemy capabilities. Williams acknowledged the instructions while privately marveling at her aircraft's continuing invisibility to systems that should have been tracking her every movement. The experimental detection equipment represented the Air Force's best assessment of Chinese technological capabilities, including the advanced systems that had successfully tracked American stealth aircraft in the Western Pacific. Control, Ghost Ryder is in position at waypoint Charlie, Williams reported. Still no threat warnings, still no indication of radar illumination. Whatever you've done to this aircraft, it's working. The experimental radar systems activated with power levels and scanning sophistication that exceeded anything in operational military inventories. These were prototype technologies designed to counter the most advanced stealth capabilities that American intelligence analysts believed enemy forces could deploy within the next decade. Rebecca watched the detection displays with heightened attention, recognizing that this phase of testing would determine whether her modifications could counter not only current threats, but future technological developments. The geometric principles underlying her approach should provide inherent protection against radar advances, but practical validation required exposure to systems that pushed beyond established capabilities. The results exceeded even Rebecca's most optimistic expectations. The experimental detection systems, despite their revolutionary sophistication and unprecedented power levels, registered the same empty sky that had characterized the earlier testing phases. Williams' modified F-35 remained completely invisible to radar technologies that represented the cutting edge of electromagnetic detection research. Colonel Hayes absorbed the test results with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed a definitive validation of American technological superiority. Dr. Chun, your modifications have achieved performance levels that exceed our most ambitious requirements. How quickly can these modifications be implemented across our operational fleet? Rebecca had been preparing for this question since the test began, developing implementation strategies that could rapidly deploy her geometric modifications across multiple aircraft platforms without disrupting existing operational commitments. The beauty of her approach was its compatibility with conventional manufacturing processes, eliminating the extended development cycles that typically accompanied revolutionary technologies. Initial modifications can begin immediately for aircraft undergoing scheduled maintenance, Rebecca replied. The geometric changes can be implemented using standard aerospace machining and forming processes, with full fleet modification possible within 6 months. The timeline represented a strategic advantage that could restore American air superiority before enemy forces had time to deploy countermeasures or develop alternative detection methods. Unlike complex technologies that required years of development and testing, Rebecca's modifications could be implemented immediately using existing industrial capabilities. Dr. Whitfield studied the comprehensive test data while calculating the implications for Project Shadowfall and the broader defense industry. Rebecca, the performance improvements you've achieved represent the most significant advancement in stealth technology since the original F-117 program. This could revolutionize military aviation for the next generation. The assessment reflected more than technical admiration. It acknowledged that Rebecca's work had potentially saved American air superiority at a moment when technological parity with rival nations had threatened to eliminate decisive military advantages that had defined global power relationships for decades. 6 months after the successful test flights over Edwards Air Force Base, Rebecca stood before the assembled leadership of the American aerospace industry in the Pentagon's most secure briefing auditorium. The worn messenger bag and faded clothing that had once made her invisible among her colleagues had been replaced by the crisp uniform of a newly appointed director of advanced stealth research, a position created specifically to oversee the revolutionary changes her work had brought to military aviation. The transformation in her professional status had been swift and comprehensive. Rebecca Chen, who had spent 7 years hiding her capabilities behind the facade of a routine materials engineer, now commanded research programs with budgets exceeding those of entire corporations. Her geometric modifications had been successfully integrated into every American stealth aircraft, creating a technological advantage that intelligence analysts projected would maintain American air superiority for at least the next 2 decades. Defense. Secretary Robert Morrison stood at the podium, preparing to deliver a classified briefing that would reshape how the defense establishment understood both current capabilities and future threats. Behind him, a display screen showed satellite imagery of Chinese military facilities where construction had accelerated dramatically following intelligence reports of American stealth advances that exceeded all known technological capabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, Secretary Morrison began. 6 months ago, we faced a strategic crisis that threatened to eliminate American air superiority within the next decade. Today, I'm pleased to report that innovative thinking and breakthrough engineering have not only addressed that threat, but established technological advantages that surpass our most optimistic projections. The assembled officials represented the highest levels of American defense leadership: generals, admirals, intelligence directors, and aerospace executives who had spent decades managing the technological competition that defined modern military strategy. Their presence indicated that Rebecca's contributions had achieved recognition at the highest levels of government. Dr. Rebecca Chun's geometric interference modifications have been successfully deployed across our operational stealth fleet. Morrison continued. Initial results from combat training exercises indicate electromagnetic signature reductions that exceed 99.8% across all frequency bands, essentially achieving true invisibility for our aircraft platforms. The performance figures drew murmurs of amazement from officials who understood the strategic implications of such dramatic improvements. True electromagnetic invisibility represented the kind of decisive technological advantage that could determine the outcomes of future conflicts before they began, rendering enemy air defense systems effectively useless against American aircraft. Rebecca observed the briefing from her position in the front row, still adjusting to the recognition and authority that had replaced years of professional anonymity. The transformation had been disorienting. Colleagues who had once dismissed her as unremarkable now sought her approval for research directions, and her technical opinions carried weight that extended far beyond electromagnetic theory into strategic planning and resource allocation. General Patricia Vance, the Air Force Chief of Staff, stood to address the broader implications of Rebecca's technological breakthrough for military strategy and force structure planning. The stealth advantages that Dr. Chun has provided allow us to reconsider fundamental assumptions about air warfare and defensive planning. Our aircraft can now operate in environments that would have been prohibitively dangerous just months ago. The strategic implications extended beyond individual aircraft capabilities to comprehensive changes in how military operations could be planned and executed. True electromagnetic invisibility opened possibilities for deep penetration strikes, persistent surveillance, and rapid deployment operations that had previously been impossible due to detection risks. Admiral James Patterson, representing the Navy's perspective on how stealth advances affected carrier operations and maritime strategy, added his assessment of the technological transformation. Dr. Chun's modifications have essentially eliminated the electromagnetic detection threat to our aviation assets. This represents the most significant advancement in operational capability since the development of precision-guided munitions. Rebecca recognized the historical parallel in Admiral Patterson's comparison. Precision-guided weapons had revolutionized military strategy by enabling surgical strikes that achieved strategic objectives with minimal collateral damage. Her electromagnetic invisibility modifications promised similar strategic transformation. By enabling operations that were previously impossible due to detection limitations, Dr. Martinez, who had been promoted to lead the team responsible for integrating Rebecca's modifications across multiple aircraft platforms, stood to present implementation results that demonstrated the practical impact of theoretical breakthroughs. His earlier skepticism had been replaced by genuine admiration for someone whose simple approach had achieved results that his sophisticated metamaterial research had been unable to match. Integration of Dr. Chun's geometric modifications has proceeded ahead of schedule across all aircraft types, Martinez reported. The manufacturing processes are straightforward enough that modifications can be completed during routine maintenance cycles, eliminating the operational disruptions typically associated with major system upgrades. The implementation success reflected the elegant simplicity that had characterized Rebecca's approach from the beginning. While her colleagues had pursued complex solutions that required revolutionary manufacturing capabilities, her geometric modifications leveraged existing industrial processes to achieve revolutionary performance improvements. Dr. Zhang, who had been among the first to recognize the potential of Rebecca's approach, presented test results that demonstrated how classical interference principles could achieve performance that rivaled theoretical quantum applications. The geometric modifications create electromagnetic interference patterns that simulate quantum-level effects while requiring nothing more sophisticated than precise machining and surface forming. Rebecca smiled at Zhang's presentation, remembering their early conversations about simple solutions to complex problems. Zhang had possessed the intuitive understanding necessary to recognize that breakthrough capabilities could emerge from innovative application of established principles rather than development of exotic technologies. Colonel Hayes, who had been promoted to oversee all advanced stealth programs following the success of Rebecca's modifications, addressed the international implications of American technological advances that had restored decisive military advantages. Intelligence reports indicate that potential adversaries are struggling to understand how we achieved such dramatic performance improvements. Our electromagnetic invisibility capabilities appear to exceed their theoretical projections by several orders of magnitude. The intelligence assessment reflected both the success of Rebecca's modifications and the strategic confusion that her breakthrough had created among enemy military planners. Nations that had invested heavily in developing detection systems to counter American stealth technology found themselves facing aircraft that were essentially undetectable using any known radar principles. Secretary Morrison returned to the podium to deliver the briefing's most significant announcement, one that would establish Rebecca's work as the foundation for decades of future research and development. The President has authorized the establishment of the Chun Institute for Advanced Electromagnetic Research, which will be directed by Dr. Chun and focused on maintaining American technological superiority in stealth and detection systems. The Institute represented more than recognition of Rebecca's contributions. It acknowledged that her unique combination of theoretical knowledge and practical implementation skills represented a national strategic asset that required institutional protection and development. The Chun Institute would ensure that the intellectual foundations of American electromagnetic superiority remained secure, while continuing to advance the technological frontiers that her work had opened. Rebecca accepted the appointment with the same measured professionalism that had characterized her response to years of being overlooked and underestimated. "I'm honored by the confidence you've placed in my work," she replied simply. "Our focus will remain on practical applications that serve our national security requirements rather than theoretical research that lacks immediate implementation potential." Her commitment to practical results over academic recognition reflected the philosophy that had guided her approach throughout the crisis that had transformed her career. Rebecca understood that technological superiority required constant innovation and rapid implementation rather than extended development cycles that allowed adversaries time to develop countermeasures. As the briefing concluded and defense officials began planning the strategic changes that Rebecca's work had made possible, she remained in the auditorium reflecting on the extraordinary transformation that had elevated her from professional exile to national recognition. The journey from dismissed materials engineer to director of advanced research represented more than personal vindication. It demonstrated that Breakthrough capabilities could emerge from unexpected sources when crisis demanded innovative thinking. Dr. Whitfield approached her as the auditorium emptied, his expression carrying the respect of someone who had learned to appreciate genius that didn't announce itself through conventional credentials or aggressive self-promotion. "Rebecca, I want to thank you for what you've accomplished. Your work has quite literally saved American air superiority." Rebecca accepted his gratitude, while maintaining perspective on achievements that had emerged from years of hidden preparation rather than sudden inspiration. "The work speaks for itself," she replied. "Our challenge now is maintaining the advantages we've gained while preparing for the next technological competition." The response reflected her understanding that technological superiority required constant vigilance and continued innovation rather than complacency based on current achievements. The Chinese breakthrough that had triggered their crisis demonstrated that adversaries possessed sophisticated research capabilities that could challenge American advantages if vigilance was relaxed. 3 years later, Rebecca stood in the Chun Institute's Advanced Research Laboratory, watching her team develop next-generation stealth technologies that built on the geometric principles she had pioneered while exploring applications that extended far beyond aircraft platforms. The Institute had become the focal point for American electromagnetic research, attracting the world's most talented researchers to work on problems that would define military technology for the coming decades. The worn boots that had once drawn mockery from junior engineers now carried her through laboratories where revolutionary research was conducted daily. Those same engineers, now seasoned researchers themselves, understood that appearances could be devastatingly deceptive and that true expertise often concealed itself behind modest presentation and quiet competence. Rebecca's story had become legendary within the aerospace industry, a reminder that breakthrough innovations could emerge from unexpected sources when crisis demanded creative thinking. The quiet materials engineer who had been overlooked for years had demonstrated that sometimes the most valuable lessons came from people who were initially underestimated. Her legacy extended beyond technological achievements to a fundamental change in how the defense establishment evaluated talent and recognized potential. The Chun Institute's hiring practices emphasized demonstrated problem-solving ability over prestigious credentials, ensuring that future innovations wouldn't be delayed by institutional blindness to unconventional expertise. Most importantly, Rebecca's work had restored confidence in American technological leadership at a moment when rival nations had threatened to achieve decisive advantages. Her geometric modifications had proven that innovative thinking and practical engineering could overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges, providing inspiration for future generations of researchers who would face their own impossible problems, requiring elegant solutions. The transformation from mockery to recognition, from exile to leadership, from simple solutions to revolutionary capabilities, demonstrated that true strength often hid in plain sight, sometimes behind a pair of worn boots, a faded messenger bag, and the quiet confidence of someone who understood that the most important work was often done away from the spotlight, waiting for the moment when hidden expertise could change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.